Stay free with me, Russell Brand. We're talking about the nature of propaganda and the nature of truth, and I suppose that leads us to real investigative journalism. And as sure as day follows night, you can't mention investigative journalism without perhaps uttering the names that rhyme with baby and maybe. Yes, it's Matt Taibbi. Matt, thanks for joining us. It's so lovely to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Russell.
Well, we're here and we're angry with you. We're angry and we're jealous that you've been making all these revelations and you've been carrying on. Can you tell me firstly how it unfolded, your relationship with Elon Musk, and how he told you that he wanted you to release these files?
Well, that part of it's complicated because I agreed from the start to a general attribution, which is sources at Twitter. So the story of how I got the story, I got to just leave it at that. But I can tell you about interactions with Elon Musk. He's it's funny. I've probably done tens of thousands of interviews. I mean, thousands at least of interviews in my life. And there's always this uncomfortable moment when you ask to turn on the tape recorder or the recorder, because the person's always afraid that you're going to, catch them. This is the first time that I looked in somebody's eyes and I could tell they legitimately just did not give a fuck at all, whether or not I was recording, like what I was going to write. And I was explicitly told I could write anything I wanted. And we haven't seen anything or run into anything that suggests otherwise. So
he's a pretty unique individual with obviously, like all comparable outlets, spent a lot of time considering Elon Musk, contemplating his unique cultural space, the fact that he's part Donald Trump, part Willy Wonka, part Richard Branson, part Steve Jobs, part disruptor. And I know that part of I don't want to gratify them by using the word backlash, but you have, subsequent to making these revelations, you've been accused of being something of a kind of, I don't know, left-wing apostate. What the idea is that Elon Musk is the sort of representative of a new sort of right-wing type of rhetoric and political perspective, and that you haven't made any revelations about a sort of shadow banning of left-wing figures. And why is that, Matt?
Because we haven't seen it yet. We're looking for it. And I think one of the misperceptions that people have is that we're sitting in front of a terminal that has global access to everything. And if that were the case, we'd be searching for all kinds of names. And but the data sets that we've looked for evidence in the other direction of, let's just say, requests from the Trump White House to get this person or that person banned. I was told that by human sources, so I felt obligated to put that in one of the threads, but we're not seeing that in the document, so I can't write about it. And I think everybody would say the same thing, which is, like, I don't care. Like, if it's interesting, I'll put it out there. But what we're seeing so far in these documents is not suggesting a whole lot of that. Let's put it that way.
The most interesting revelations, or the most scintillating at least, appear to be the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, Twitter having a secret blacklist, and the removal of Donald Trump and trying to create a unique case for the removal of a sort of a political figure. But you believe that the most important thing is the relationship between law enforcement, government, and social media. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, and that was the thing that I was really most interested headed into this project was, I think a lot of people have questions. How involved is the government in monitoring and censoring the speech of ordinary people? What we've seen so far already, and we have definite conclusive proof of, is that there are lots and lots of reports where we see Twitter executives saying things like, DHS flagged this, the FBI flagged this, and then there's a whole thread where they decide what to do about it. Do we remove it? Do we put a label on it? So there's tons of that stuff where they're clearly getting communications from the FBI. We also know that they have meetings, not just with the FBI, and the DHS, but also a surprise was the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who I hadn't heard that before. That was a new one. And then we're learning a lot about the kind of scraping of raw intelligence and fire hosing it to the government, all kinds of government agencies on the back end. So the government is harvesting tons of information from these companies and then turning around and spitting it back to companies like Twitter in the form of requests for, maybe bannings, maybe shadow bans, maybe deletions or labels and that sort of thing. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating because I suppose back in the utopian early days of online spaces, I think what all of us understood is that a new territory had emerged. And like any territory, it could become democratized. It could become a tool of connection, a revolutionary tool, something that would finally usurp the monopolized media spaces and their ongoing support of a elitist agenda, for want of a better phrase. But what has happened is that expertly the social media spaces themselves have been corporatized and corralled, and what you have demonstrated through these revelations, through your revelations, is just examples of that in practice, that these spaces are no longer free spaces. They are managed and controlled spaces. They're not organic. And the idea that social media could be used to create insurrections, even if they're ideological insurrections rather than sort of actual social revolutions, is being quite strongly prohibited.
Yeah, I think the thing that we were shocked by was the degree of idiosyncratic control over the visibility of every single user, account, hashtag. They have a whole universe of stuff that they can do to any single account. They can dial it all the way down to you cannot be searched. And then from there are like countless gradations of things that they can do, all the way up to your account will not trend. Only people who follow you can see you. Even people who follow you won't see you unless they search. Like there's a whole list of stuff. So they have absolute control over the visibility of basically everything. And we haven't learned a lot about amplification of accounts yet, because that appears to be another side of the company. But in terms of cutting it down, dialing it down, we're learning a lot about that.
So presumably much of the angst about Elon Musk's acquisition was that he was visibly and palpably not a compliant figure like Zuckerberg or other oligarchs in the space. It isn't on board ideologically with the project. We know that sort of Zuckerberg wrote to Fauci and it's just sort of like, how can I be of any assistance type way? So if this is happening at Twitter, obviously the assumption is that similar programs are operating throughout the social media world, and another space that we are sort of taught to regard as neutral is in fact a highly managed space that's curated and potentially, as you say, amplified where necessary. We would assume it's true at Facebook. We'd assume it's true elsewhere.
Yeah, and we've seen evidence of the conversations within Twitter about what they do at other platforms. So you're right about that. I think it's a safe assumption that every single one of the major platforms has basically the same arrangement with the government, and we can't say definitely exactly how it works yet, but I'm assuming, I think it's a safe supposition that there's probably something similar to what's going on Twitter at the other platforms as well. It's just that Twitter is a different animal than the other platforms. Like, for instance, one of the things we were told is that you can't get sort of a viral outbreak of political activity as quickly, say, on YouTube, because people have to physically sit down and watch the video. On Twitter, it can happen in seconds, in microseconds, which is one of the reasons why they pay such close attention to every single thing that happens on the platform.
What will Elon Musk's actual ability to deny this kind of access to those sorts of agencies be? And I know this is speculative, and I certainly wouldn't expect you to put your relationship in jeopardy, but how distinct, so firstly, how much is Elon Musk likely to oppose the previous regime's relationship, and how different is Elon Musk's agenda likely to be, given that many of his economic relationships are going to be sort of comparable?
You know, we don't know that yet, and he explicitly, again, he told me we're not just interested in looking at bad stuff in the past. If there's bad stuff in the future, we want you to look at that too. So as we learn about all these things, we can look at it. But I will say, as a journalist, I think all of us, we all feel the same way, which is that we don't know how long this opportunity to look at this material is going to exist. And so I feel like we have a responsibility to try to dive into it as quickly as we can and as comprehensively as we can before, something happens. Let's say there's a federal investigation or a congressional investigation and the whole thing gets shut down. So we feel like we got to look at that first. And there are other questions, obviously, about what's going on at Twitter now. If people have questions about Elon Musk, I mean, those are things that we can try to answer. But I feel like right now, the priority is the documents that are in front of us.
Watch entire episodes on demand for free at rumble.com/Russell Brand.